Hello, this is Jay Mitchell. We are back from another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have days 366 to 500, Trump's complete track record on LGBTQ issues from unclosetedmedia.com, posted by Knee Concussions, and they said, since President Donald Trump's re-election, the full force of the federal government has been working to dismantle anything and everything it calls gender ideology. The past 4.5 months have seen the Trump administration's key agencies using executive orders from the president's first days in office to further upend queer and trans rights, while federal judges continue to block some of his agency's anti-LGBTQ policies. His administration has ignored court orders at least 31 times. Here's every move Trump administration have made on LGBTQ issues since January 21st of this year. This is my own personal writing/work, and if you find any glaring mistakes or problems, please let me know. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for the state going after LGBTQ issues, but I don't really care for the state pushing LGBTQ issues either, and that's what you have when the Democrats are in power. Ideally, we just have the state completely out of LGBTQ issues, just like with every other issue, but sadly, that's not the world we live in. And I think it's just really, the reason they focus on them so much is that they're one of the big wedge issues along with abortion that, they can use to divide people, pretty much any cultural issue, I would say, and that it's to distract from the fact that they agree on pretty much 95% of stuff, but you'd never know that from simply browsing social media. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, I just got banned from the Classical Liberal subreddit, even though I've not posted anything there in well over a year at this point, posted by Plasman30, and they said, did this subreddit have some kind of MAGA takeover? The rules say it's an explicitly right-wing subreddit, and any left-wing discussions will result in a ban. Is the Mises Caucus fighting back over its loss of control of the Libertarian Party? And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. But it's Reddit. They're gonna hand out bans like it's candy on Halloween. I think that's important to remember as well. Of course, this subreddit would care about a right wing takeover of a subreddit, but 95% of subreddits are left wing circle jerks who ban any dissent at all, and they don't care. They only care about this one since it's the out group doing the banning rather than the in group, and that's important to remember as well. It's like that one meme of the Joker from The Dark Knight, leftists have ideologically captured 95% of Reddit and no one bats an eye. Rightists take over a subreddit and everyone loses their minds. And this is what you're seeing here, Reddit, they can't stand any subreddit that doesn't uphold the woke circle jerk 24/7 like this one. And yeah, I don't think they should be banning people for just, but ultimately the left-wing woke subreddits do that. This subreddit's had me banned for almost 2 years, for instance, and they don't see any hypocrisy in that whatsoever. And it's just it just goes to show you how unprincipled these people are. They say they love freedom of speech, but then you say something they don't like and they'll censor you like there's no tomorrow. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, cutting tariffs on farm equipment is another admission that Trump's trade policies are increasing prices, from Reason.com, posted by J.I. Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for tariffs, but if the government wants to implement tariffs, they have every ability to do so, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. I think all forms of taxation are theft, and especially if you don't consent to them, and tariffs are simply a tax on imported goods. Next we have, the state is the product and the manifestation of an irreconcilability of class antagonisms, V.I. Lenin, and that looks like a quote from V.I. Lenin, posted by Lee Harvey Griswold, and they added the description ... And yeah, personally, I guess I would kind of agree with that quote. I don't agree with Lenin on too much, but I definitely would agree with that post, but that quote of how the state is ultimately the product and manifestation of ultimately whatever the hierarchical structure of the day is. And it just goes to show you that, ultimately, people like Lenin, when they're not in power, may claim to be against the state, but the second they take power, suddenly they're the ones to be calling the shots. And ultimately, it's why I think we shouldn't have a state to begin with, because, ultimately, it's just going to lead to a hierarchical structure with the state being in a position of government authority and the peasants or non-state actors being in a position of you have to do whatever the government says, or else you're gonna get arrested, jailed, and possibly killed. Next we have, Trump brought over $1 million in Dell stock before Pentagon signed $9.7 billion contract with company, from People.com, posted by Ragnarok KXG, and that's a cross post from the Law subreddit. And Yeah, personally, I don't think he should have done that. But ultimately, the people are going to be self-serving first and foremost, and the government is no exception to that. Of course, Reddit constantly calls Trump out when he does stuff like this. But that there's tons of other ones who do it as well, like Nancy Pelosi. Reddit doesn't care nearly as much as when Nancy Pelosi does insider stock trading, and it just goes to show you that they only care really about the letter next to their name rather than any consistent principles at all. Next we have She Was a Savant About an Idiot, posted by Donald Key. That's a cross post from the TikTok cringe subreddit, and that looks like a clip from Hillary Clinton speech from June 3, 2016. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Hillary Clinton. Her foreign policy. I think she was talking about Trump's foreign policy in this one. I don't know for sure, but ultimately, she's one to talk a lot because if she was in power, it'd be the same corrupt grifting, but Reddit would be completely fine with it. And just go show you, Reddit really doesn't care about anything other than the letter next to the name. They don't have any. They're completely fine when the in-group grifts and uses the state to push its own agenda. But when the outgroup does it, suddenly it's the worst thing ever. And it's interesting. They they'll say, stuff like Benghazi or her email server, they're just personal attacks against Clinton. But they're completely fine with anything that Trump does. If Trump steps out of line, they'll go after him with the full extent of their fury. And it just goes to show you, no principles, only team. In reality, both Clinton and Trump should probably be in prison. Same with pretty much all the other members of the Epstein class. But of course, Reddit only cares about the Donald Trump in relation to the Epstein class. They don't care about a single other person, especially when they have a D next to their name. Next we have Colonel Douglas McGregor, All For What, the national conversation from YouTube.com, posted by Ice Austin Bicycle Tour, and that looks like a YouTube video from the same name, posted by Daniel Davis /Deep Dive. And yeah, I personally don't really agree with McGregor on everything, but I definitely do think, the U.S. government should definitely stop interfering in foreign nations' affairs, like if Ukraine or Israel or Venezuela or Iran. But ultimately, the U.S. is in a position of, they're going to be the world police regardless of who's in power. And the past couple of decades have shown that. Obama kind of campaigned against the U.S. being the world police, but then he got in power and kept the status quo. And then Trump also kind of campaigned against being the world police, but then he got in power and kind of kept the status quo. It doesn't really matter which figureheads in the White House. They're not really the ones running the country. It's really the deep state military industrial complex, satanic cabal of lizard people, whatever you want to call them. Next we have Landlord, posted by Lee Harvey Griswold, and that looks like a screenshot of a link from x.com/purplepinge, and it's a picture of Mao Zedong. It says, "Landlord's right has its origin in robbery. The landlords, like all other men, love to reap when they never sowed, and demand to rent for even the natural produce of the earth." Adam Smith, photo of Mao Zedong is unrelated. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Mao. I guess it's not really Mao quote, it's an Adam Smith quote trying to distract in the picture of Mao is just to say, oh, it sounds like Mao would say, but it's actually something your capitalist thing would say, even though I think it's taken out of context, and he might not have, I think he might have said he never really said, I think it's taken out of context, I would say, and I think that's important to remember as well. It's interesting how a subreddit might not like this quote because it's from the capitalist, with the guy who invented capitalism, but that then they'd have to start criticizing how Mao, I guess, I personally think the subreddit so leftist is probably really big into Mao and Stalin and all the other leftist communist dictators. I think that's important to remember as well. Ultimately, I guess you could make the point that landlords are in a position of a hierarchical authority, but ultimately, if the hierarchical authority is voluntary rather than forced, that's I think the libertarian position that should be allowed to be like that. The problem with the state is that it's forced hierarchy rather than voluntary hierarchy. Next we have Japan weighs stricter age verification for social media users, from japantimes.co.jp, posted by Inferno Warrior 299, and that's a cross post from the Actual Conservatism subreddit. And they said, Japan's considering passing a law on yet another global attack on digital privacy. This should concern everyone as these troublesome laws keep getting these proposed and passed that enables the surveillance state. This is a blatant attack on our civil liberties. It needs to be talked about more. It must be stopped before it's too late. P.S. Sorry I have not posted for a while. I was a bit busy. And yeah, personally, I would agree with that. Ultimately, if a private company wants to do age verification, should be able to, but I don't think the state should be forcing them to do age verification if they don't want to. It should be up to, ultimately, I do think, a lot of platforms should probably have age verification, but, it should be up to the parents and caregivers of what their kids are looking at online rather than the state. Next, we have The Cigar Lounge That Bureaucracy Almost Killed from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I think libertarian positions, if you want to have a cigar lounge, you should be able to. It should, ultimately, I don't think I think smoking's not good for you, but if you want to smoke and go to a cigar lounge, you definitely should be able to. Next, we have The Draft is Unpopular. Registration becomes automatic in December anyway from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for the draft, but I think everyone already did have to register for the draft, so I think automatic registration, well, at least all the men have to, and the women don't have to. It just goes to show you how sexist the government is. But of course, Reddit doesn't care about that because, it's very misandrist. Sexism against men is completely fine, but sexism against women is the worst thing ever in the eyes of the average Redditor. But regardless, I definitely do think we should be getting rid of the draft entirely. But if you are going to force men to register for the draft, the registration should probably be automatic, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have CPB agents violently arrested the Chicago woman. Now she's seeking $10 million in damages from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't care for that. I don't care for her getting arrested. But ultimately, they can arrest you for whatever reason they want to, and oftentimes there's no way you can fight back because they control the courts and the legal system as well. Maybe she'll get those $10 million in damages, but ultimately, it's not 100% guaranteed since the state's in a position of authority when it comes to the justice system in its entirety, from the police to the courts. Next, we have House passes resolution to end the Iran war from thehill.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I think that's good. But, ultimately, the House isn't really in a position of government authority to... it is in a position of government authority, but it's not really in the position of authority. A lot of the government's just going to defer to whatever the executive branch wants. And, if the House wants to pass a resolution to end the Iran war, I think that's good. I personally don't... I think the Iran war should be over. I don't think it should even start in the first place. But, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't when it comes to what the military is actually doing. The government can say the elected officials aren't really the ones in charge of the military. The military is really in charge of itself. Some people say the president's commander-in-chief of the U.S. military, but I definitely do think it's more the deep state military-industrial complex, satanic cabal, lizard people, whatever you want to call them, who are really calling the shots. So I definitely do think if the House wants to pass a resolution, it's fine. But ultimately, the Iran war might still continue anyway because government authority, if people don't want to listen to it, and they're in a position where they can justify keep doing what they're doing, ultimately, there's sometimes nothing you can do about it. Next, we have This Place Is Too Many Daily Bad News posted here. So here's some stuff me and my crew made over on W Place, posted by Wonderful Cake 60979. And yeah, personally, I think it's nice to see a post in the subreddit that's not some version of Orange Man Bad. And yeah, it looks cool. It looks like they got some Don't Tread on Me flags and some ANCAP stuff. And yeah, I think that's cool. And yeah, that's my thoughts there. Next, we have Senate GOP drops $1 billion for White House ballroom from budget package from thehill.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think the U.S. should be spending $1 billion for the White House ballroom. But ultimately, if they want to spend $1 billion of that, they ultimately, you don't get. I think it's the big problem. You don't get to decide where your taxpayer dollars go to, and sadly, that's just how the world works. I'm glad they dropped it from their budget package, but I think it's only a matter of time before they spend it anyway. Next, we have Peace President attacks Massey others for not being warmongers, proposed by Jai Porcupine, and that's a screenshot of a truth from Donald Trump, who proved yesterday in meaningless votes. The House voted 4 bad Republicans, all Democrats, to limit my word powers right in the middle of my final negotiations to end the war for the Islamic Republic of Iran. Who should do such an unpatriotic thing? They know where the negotiations stand. The Democrats are fooled by Trump derangement syndrome. They would rather have a country without and give me another of many victories. The 4 Republicans, that's a whole other story. They're grandstanders. They should be ashamed of themselves. MAGA, President And yeah, personally, I definitely do think, the House made the right decision here, but ultimately, if Trump doesn't want to listen to it, there's no, he hasn't been held accountable for anything he's done over the past decade. Why isn't he maybe start being held accountable now? Ultimately, I think the Iran war will continue as long as those in positions of authority feel like it, not necessarily those in positions of elected authority. As I said, maybe, because a lot of unelected bureaucrats, deep state, satanic wealth, lizard people, military industrial complex, whatever you want to call them. I think that's important to remember as well. And I think, yeah, so I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.